Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time before beer, before even the thought of it was brewing in ancient minds. Picture yourself standing on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the first seeds of civilization took root, and the landscape stretches with untamed beauty. The air smells fresh, mingled with the scent of wild grasses and muddy riverbanks. You're looking at the beginning of humanity's leap from simple existence to complex societies, a time when people didn't know about hops or barley, and brewing was a far-off thought. In this time, the people of Mesopotamia had yet to become the beer-loving culture we'd come to associate with them. Instead, they were just learning to live together in settled communities, living by the ebb and flow of the river's seasons. You can almost feel the gentle tug of the river as it pulls you into this strange, bustling world of farmers tilling the soil, building rudimentary homes, and figuring out how to survive. The world you're in now, ancient Mesopotamia, is one of the earliest civilizations, tucked between the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It's around 6,000 years ago. And though the people here haven't yet invented beer, they're laying the groundwork for everything that will come after. They've just started cultivating the land, growing crops, and discovering the secrets of the earth. Secrets that would later unlock the potential for things like fermentation. You stand amongst these people, observing their early daily life. They have no idea that the next chapter of their lives will soon be shaped by the very grains they are beginning to harvest. Theirs is a world where survival is about more than just food. It's about finding ways to thrive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Let's make this journey feel like we're traveling through time together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You continue your journey through ancient Mesopotamia. And now, the land itself is starting to feel more familiar, like the first stirrings of a great awakening. As you stand beside the fields of golden grain, there's an almost sacred air to the place. The sun beats down on the farmers, their hands covered in dirt, as they harvest wheat and barley with care. It's the earliest days of agriculture, and the people here are beginning to understand how to coax the land into providing them with the sustenance they need. But beer, that's not even a flicker in their minds yet. You can smell the earth as they work, the sweet scent of barley ripening under the sun. There's an almost magical feeling in the air, a sense that these humble beginnings will grow into something much bigger. It's hard to imagine it now, but in just a few thousand years, this area will be known as the cradle of civilization. The people here will soon not only grow their food, but will begin to shape society in ways we are still living with today. The discovery of grain wasn't an overnight success. These early farmers learned the hard way about planting, tending, and harvesting. They didn't know it yet, but they were setting the stage for one of the most important things the world would come to enjoy: fermentation. The grain they harvested would eventually be used for food, yes. But as they refined their techniques, they'd soon learn that grain room, when left to ferment, could give them a drink that could refresh and delight. Historians still argue whether the very first brew was an accidental discovery or the result of some early genius. Was it a case of someone simply forgetting some grain in a water jug, only to find it bubbling a few days later? Or did someone intentionally experiment with different methods, hoping to produce something new and refreshing? Whatever the case, it wouldn't be long before the Mesopotamians discovered that, like many things in their world, Fermentation could be used to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. You feel the excitement in the air as they begin to experiment with their harvests. And while they may not realize it, they are only a few small steps away from creating something that will change the course of history. The first form of fermented drink that would eventually lead to beer. The people are already laying the groundwork for one of the world's oldest and most beloved beverages. And they have no idea how it will impact civilizations to come. Imagine the moment when they first tasted their own creation. What did it feel like? The coolness of the drink on a hot day, the slight fizz, the almost intoxicating effects that began to ease the burdens of their hard labor. There's a certain sense of wonder that must have washed over them. Something that we still experience today when we first taste something new and unexpected. But before the first sip, there's much work to be done, fertilizing the fields, building tools, and mastering the art of planting. And as the sun begins to dip behind the hills, you realize that the Mesopotamians weren't just learning how to grow food. They were learning how to grow culture, how to create community, and how to build the foundation for what would later become one of humanity's oldest trades. As you wander through the dusty streets of ancient Mesopotamia, the air is thick with the scent of barley and wheat. The harvests of the past seasons are stored in large baskets, ready for the hands of skilled artisans who are about to craft something that will change everything. The people here, with their simple tools and hard-working hands, have discovered something remarkable. While the grains they cultivated were once solely for bread, now they are beginning to use them in new and unexpected ways. You feel a sense of excitement as you walk along the paths where people are experimenting with the fermentation process, unknowingly laying the foundations for a future full of feasts, celebrations, and the first true form of beer. The first true alcoholic beverages weren't made with the precision we have today. There were no refrigeration methods, no complex brewing kits, and certainly no modern hygiene standards. But what they had was the gift of nature: grain, water, and time. All that was needed was a little patience and a bit of luck. It is said that the first alcoholic drink may have been a happy accident, like so many of the greatest inventions. Perhaps a jar of grain and water was forgotten in a corner for too long. And when someone stumbled upon it, they found it bubbling, with a taste that was both strange and familiar at once. Historians still argue whether the first fermented drink was intentionally brewed or if it was the product of natural fermentation. Some suggest that early brewers were just as accidental as modern-day mixologists, adding fruit, grains, or even wild herbs to water in the hope of creating something new. Others believe that the knowledge of fermentation came from observing nature, the way fruits naturally rotted, or how grain, left to sit, would ferment and turn into something with a kick. Whatever the case may have been, it didn't take long for the ancient Mesopotamians to realize that fermented grain could be a game changer. Not only did it provide them with a drink that could quench their thirst, but it also had the added benefit of acting as a form of preservation. Alcoholic drinks could last much longer than plain water, which made them a valuable commodity in a society where fresh water wasn't always easy to come by. The slow realization that the grain they grew could be used to brew an intoxicating drink created a new avenue for trade, culture, and social interaction. You can imagine the first sips of that fermented beverage, the warmth it brought to the body, the slight bitterness, and the buzz of excitement that came with the first taste of something new. The effects of alcohol were soon understood: relaxation, euphoria, and an escape from the mundane. In fact, it wasn't long before beer became intertwined with ritual and religion in Mesopotamia. People began to drink it during feasts, ceremonies, and religious observances. The drink wasn't just for sustenance. It was part of the social fabric, connecting the people with the gods and each other. The role of beer in Mesopotamian society was so central that the brewing of it became a craft, passed down from generation to generation. The art of fermentation was taught, learned, and perfected, with recipes evolving over time. Brewers took great pride in their craft, as beer became a symbol of both the bounty of the land and the ingenuity of human hands. Historians still debate the exact role of beer in religious rituals, whether it was simply a communal drink shared by the masses, or whether it had deeper spiritual significance. Some suggest that the Mesopotamians believed that beer was a gift from the gods, a divine beverage bestowed upon them to bring people together and create harmony. Others argue that beer was more of a secular drink, used as a form of social bonding or even as a commodity traded in the bustling markets of ancient cities. As the days pass, you watch the people of Mesopotamia slowly perfect their brewing techniques, experimenting with different types of grain and ingredients, discovering new methods of fermentation. With each passing year, beer became more refined, more intricate, and more important to their culture. But there is something else you begin to notice. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was the gateway to a new way of life. It marked a shift in how the Mesopotamians interacted with their environment, their economy, and their society. It wasn't just about the drink itself, but the communal act of brewing and sharing. It was the social rituals that surrounded beer consumption that began to define the very essence of Mesopotamian culture. As you walk deeper into the bustling cities of ancient Mesopotamia, you notice the vibrant market squares alive with activity. People are haggling for goods, trading textiles, pottery, and, strangely enough, beer. In this rapidly developing society, beer has already gained a status far beyond just a beverage. It has become currency, an item so valuable that it is used to pay for labor, services, and even in exchange for goods. You can almost hear the clink of coins, but instead of hard currency, people are handing over jars and bowls filled with this ancient brew. This isn't just a casual drink anymore. Beer is integral to the functioning of Mesopotamian society, woven into the fabric of their economic system. Workers who labored in the fields or the palaces were often paid in beer, sometimes even in large quantities. Historians have found records of workers being given portions of beer as part of their wages, a practice that would seem odd to us today, but was entirely normal in the ancient world. After all, beer was a vital part of daily life, both nourishing and sustaining, and the Mesopotamians recognized its value. Beer had a unique place in the economy because it wasn't just a luxury item, it was a practical necessity. It was a drink that anyone, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest laborer, could access. Unlike other goods, which were often reserved for the elite, beer was for everyone. You begin to understand that beer wasn't simply a drink of indulgence, but also of practicality. It provided nutrients and hydration in a world where safe drinking water was sometimes scarce. It was an essential part of the diet, much like bread. As you observe the flow of trade, you begin to see beer's role in social life. It was consumed in large quantities during communal feasts and religious ceremonies. These events were not just about food and drink, but about fostering relationships. Beer became a social lubricant in the fullest sense, creating bonds between individuals, families, and communities. Whether at the family hearth or in a public gathering, the sharing of beer brought people together, bridging social divides. Historians still debate whether beer consumption was equally widespread across all classes in Mesopotamian society. Some believe that it was mostly consumed by the lower classes, who needed the nourishment and the affordable alternative to water. Others suggest that beer, while certainly consumed by the masses, was also enjoyed by the elite, especially during the lavish banquets and religious rituals held in honor of the gods. There's evidence that even kings and priests drank beer, elevating its status beyond just a humble beverage to something with divine significance. As the market for beer grows, so does the demand for better brewing techniques. The knowledge of fermentation improves, and brewers begin experimenting with new ingredients, such as dates, honey, and even herbs to enhance the flavor. What starts as a simple drink made from barley evolves into something more complex, a symbol of Mesopotamia's rich agricultural heritage. The grains grown in the fertile soil of the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys become the lifeblood of Mesopotamian beer, which was prized not only locally but also beyond the city walls. Beer becomes an important trade commodity, exchanged with neighboring regions and beyond, making it an essential part of the Mesopotamian economy. Walking through the markets, you can't help but notice the massive clay vessels that hold beer in abundance. These vats and jars, carefully crafted by skilled potters, are filled with the precious liquid. Some of these containers are sealed with clay lids to keep the beer from spoiling, while others are left open for people to sample directly from the jar. The process of beer brewing is no longer a secret. It's a well-known craft, passed down through generations, and celebrated in festivals and feasts. Brewers take great pride in their work, and you begin to appreciate the skill involved in creating the perfect brew. And yet, amidst all this activity, there's something else that draws your attention: the sacredness of beer. It's not just a drink of the people, it's also a gift from the gods. You watch as priests prepare for a ceremonial offering, pouring the first of the beer into an altar, where it is presented to the gods in gratitude for their blessings. Beer, like bread, has become a symbol of life itself, connecting the mundane to the divine. The people, in their simple yet profound way, acknowledge that beer is not just a human creation, but a divine gift. Historians still argue whether beer consumption in religious rituals was as widespread as it seems in the archaeological record. Some suggest that beer was primarily a ceremonial drink reserved for important religious ceremonies, while others believe that it was consumed regularly by the public during religious festivals and rites. What is clear is that beer played an important role in the relationship between the Mesopotamians and their gods, whether as a gift, a symbol of the harvest, or a means of achieving communion with the divine. As you sit by the warmth of the fire, you sip your own drink, contemplating the history that has brought you here. It's incredible to think that this simple beverage, a blend of grain and water, has played such an integral role in shaping the culture, economy, and spirituality of a civilization. The humble beginnings of beer have transformed it into something much more, something that connects us to the past, to the land, and to each other, and to. As you settle into the rhythm of ancient Mesopotamian life, you begin to understand the brewing process more intimately. Imagine yourself stepping into the cool, dimly lit corner of a bustling Mesopotamian brewery. The air is thick with the scent of barley and fermenting grains, and the sound of wooden pestles crushing ingredients echoes through the room. You can see the brewers, skilled artisans, working with precision, their hands moving in practiced motions. The brewing process is no simple task. It's an art, one that has been passed down through generations, and it's treated with the utmost respect. The first step in brewing is the preparation of barley. The grains are soaked in water for several days to begin the germination process. This is where the magic of fermentation begins. As the barley sprouts, enzymes break down the starches into sugars, which will later fuel the fermentation process. You observe the brewers, stirring large clay vats with long wooden spoons, carefully monitoring the temperature and consistency of the mash. The grains are then heated and mixed with water to extract the sugars, creating a thick, porridge-like mixture that will eventually become the foundation of the beer. Next comes the fermentation. The mash is allowed to sit for several days, and you watch as the liquid slowly transforms into a frothy brew. The fermentation process is crucial, for it is during this stage that the sugars are converted into alcohol by the action of yeast. Mesopotamian brewers likely used wild yeast found in the air, or possibly even added fruit to the mixture to encourage fermentation. While their understanding of the science behind fermentation wasn't advanced by modern standards, they had a keen sense of how to create the perfect brew, honed over centuries of trial and error. Interestingly, historians still debate whether the Mesopotamians understood the exact mechanics of fermentation. Some believe they had a rudimentary understanding of yeast's role in the process, while others suggest that their focus was more on observation and practice than scientific knowledge. Regardless, it's clear that the brewing process was a delicate balance of art and craft. The brewers knew what worked, even if they didn't fully understand why. As the fermentation continues, you notice that the beer begins to take on a slight bitterness. This is likely the result of the addition of bittering agents like herbs or fruits, which were sometimes used to flavor the beer. Mesopotamian brewers didn't just create a simple, neutral drink. They crafted beer with complexity, incorporating a variety of flavors to enhance the taste. This attention to detail reflects the sophistication of their brewing practices and their commitment to quality. The beer wasn't just a drink, it was an experience, an integral part of daily life that required skill and care to perfect. While much of the brewing process may seem familiar, there's something distinctly ancient about the methods you're witnessing. The brewers use simple tools, stone mortars, wooden ladles, and clay jars, but there's an elegance in their simplicity. The process is labor-intensive, but the brewers work with a sense of pride, knowing that their craft will be enjoyed by the masses. As you watch them transfer the liquid from one vessel to another, you realize that beer, in its early form, was far from the mass-produced product we're familiar with today. It was handcrafted, individualized, and carefully prepared, with each batch carrying the unique touch of its maker. The final step in the brewing process is the serving of the beer. You see the brewers carefully ladling the frothy liquid into large clay vessels, which are then sealed with lids to keep the beer fresh. Some of these containers are small enough for individual consumption, while others are large enough to be shared among groups. The beer is poured into shallow bowls or drinking vessels, and you watch as the workers sip the liquid, enjoying the fruits of their labor. But while beer is essential for daily life, it's not just about sustenance. It's also about celebration and ritual. You see beer being poured during communal feasts and religious ceremonies, offered as a tribute to the gods. The Mesopotamians, like many ancient peoples, understood that beer wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of life, fertility, and prosperity. It was an offering to the divine, a way to honor the earth and its bounty. Historians still debate the role of beer in religious ceremonies. Some believe that beer was used primarily in private rituals, while others argue that it played a significant role in public celebrations. There's evidence that beer was poured over the altars during sacrifices, and it may have been used as part of rituals to ensure good harvests. This connection between beer and the gods further elevates the drink's status, turning it into something sacred, imbued with divine significance. As you leave the brewery, you can't help but feel a deep respect for the craft. The process of brewing, with its ancient techniques and rituals, is not just about creating a beverage. It's about connecting with the land, the gods, and the community. Beer is the drink of the people, but it's also the drink of the divine. It represents the balance between humanity and nature, between the earthly and the sacred. In a world where survival depends on the land and the seasons, beer becomes a symbol of both sustenance and spirituality, an essential part of Mesopotamian life. As you continue to reflect on the brewing process, you begin to realize that beer was not just a beverage. It was deeply entwined with the spiritual and religious fabric of Mesopotamian life. The connection between beer and the gods is undeniable. You can picture the grand, ornate temples rising above the city, their tall ziggurats reaching for the heavens. Inside, the high priests and priestesses lead elaborate rituals, and among the offerings to the gods, beer is always present. In fact, beer was often considered a sacred gift, a tribute to the deities, and an essential part of religious ceremonies. Mesopotamians believed that their gods were not just distant, abstract beings, but active participants in their daily lives. They saw their gods as powerful forces, controlling everything from the weather to the harvests. Beer, as a product of the earth, was seen as a way to connect with these divine forces, and so it was used as a medium of worship. During religious festivals, beer would be poured onto altars, offered to the gods, and shared among the priests, signifying both divine favor and the blessings of the earth. You can almost feel the excitement in the air as you observe one of these rituals. The aroma of burning incense fills your senses, and the flickering light of oil lamps casts long shadows across the stone floors. The high priests, dressed in ornate robes, hold large vessels of beer, offering it to the gods while chanting ancient prayers. These ceremonies were elaborate, and beer played a central role in ensuring that the gods were pleased, securing their blessings for the harvests, the land, and the people. Historians still debate whether the use of beer in these ceremonies was symbolic or practical. Some argue that it was more of a ritualistic offering, a way to honor the gods, while others believe that it also had a more functional purpose, such as ensuring the health of the land and the fertility of the crops. Either way, it's clear that beer was seen as a powerful substance, imbued with divine significance. It wasn't just a drink. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. In addition to public rituals, beer was also used in private religious practices. Wealthier individuals and families would often hold their own ceremonies, offering beer in smaller, more intimate settings. These ceremonies were thought to ensure personal blessings, good health, and prosperity. Beer was also consumed during funerary rites, as it was believed that the dead, too, would need the nourishment and comfort that beer could provide as they journeyed into the afterlife. The idea of beer as a divine drink was so ingrained in Mesopotamian culture that it became a part of their creation myths. The Sumerian god of wisdom, Enki, was said to have invented beer and passed it on to humanity as a gift. According to the myth, Enki created beer in the form of a magic brew that was both nourishing and spiritually potent. This story highlights just how deeply beer was woven into the fabric of Mesopotamian belief, not only as a gift from the gods, but as a central element in the divine order of the world. You can imagine the awe and reverence with which the people of Mesopotamia viewed their gods and the role that beer played in these interactions. Beer was more than just a drink. It was an offering, a blessing, and a way to maintain harmony with the natural and divine worlds. It was a symbol of life, fertility, and connection to the divine forces that controlled the land. Interestingly, beer was not the only beverage used in these rituals. Wine, too, was consumed, especially in more affluent circles. But it was beer that had the deepest spiritual significance. It was seen as the drink of the people, the commoners, and it was said to have been given to humanity directly by the gods. Beer was a reminder of the earth's generosity, and it served as a physical manifestation of the connection between humanity and the divine. As you stand in the quiet temple, surrounded by the rhythmic chants and offerings, it becomes clear that beer was more than just a drink to the ancient Mesopotamians. It was a means of communication with the gods, a way to honor the earth and ensure the continued prosperity of the people. Beer was at the heart of their rituals, their social customs, and their understanding of the natural world. Beer wasn't just about getting drunk or passing the time, it was a sacred act. It's a concept that may be hard to grasp in today's world, where beer is often seen as a casual or recreational drink. But for the ancient Mesopotamians, beer was imbued with a sense of reverence, ritual, and divine connection. It was a means of survival, a form of sustenance, and a reminder of the power of the gods who watched over them. As you reflect on the sacred role of beer in Mesopotamian life, you begin to understand just how vital this drink was. It wasn't just for the temple or the feast. It was an essential part of the Mesopotamians' relationship with the divine. It was their way of honoring the gods, ensuring good harvests, and keeping the natural world in balance. The gods weren't distant figures in the sky. They were present in every sip of beer, in every blessing, and in every prayer. Historians still argue about the exact nature of beer's role in religious ceremonies. Some believe it was a central offering in all rituals, while others suggest that its importance may have varied depending on the region and the time period. Regardless of the specifics, one thing is clear: beer was sacred, and its place in Mesopotamian religion cannot be overstated. As you imagine the flickering oil lamps and the flickering of ceremonial rituals, your mind shifts to another fascinating aspect of beer in ancient Mesopotamian life: the brewing process itself. It's hard to imagine a time before the modern conveniences of brewing. But the Mesopotamians had a method that was as sophisticated as it was unique. Standing beside a large clay vessel, you can almost smell the rich scent of fermenting barley and wheat, the essential grains for brewing. These grains were ground into a coarse flour, which was then mixed with water to create a thick porridge-like consistency. The process of brewing in Mesopotamia was far from a small-scale, home-brewed affair. This was a communal activity, with large quantities of beer being produced in temples, palaces, and even private homes for the wealthy. You can picture the workers toiling away in the heat of the day, stirring the thick mash, their hands working with practiced precision. As the mash sat, it would ferment, slowly transforming into the drink that would fuel both the masses and the gods. It wasn't just about the ingredients, though. The brewing process was infused with a sense of ceremony and ritual, a reflection of how sacred the act of brewing was. For the Mesopotamians, it was about more than creating a drink. It was about creating something that would connect the human world with the divine. This was no ordinary beer. After all, this was sacred, life-giving nectar. The most important ingredient was the barley. which was grown in abundance throughout Mesopotamia. Barley, unlike other grains, was perfect for brewing. Thanks to its high sugar content, it was the foundation of every beer batch. Ground into flour, then mixed with water to create the mash. The process took time, patience, and a careful understanding of the fermentation process. As the ancient brewers stirred the mixture, they likely relied on instinct as much as skill. Historians still argue whether the ancient Mesopotamians had an explicit understanding of fermentation, or if it was more of a lucky discovery that came from trial and error. Either way, the results were spectacular. You can see the large brewing vats now, constructed from clay, their earthy tones matching the surrounding landscape. These vats were large enough to hold hundreds of gallons of beer. As brewing was not a solitary endeavor, workers would mix the ingredients, wait for the fermentation process to occur, and then carefully strain the liquid to separate the barley from the drink. The beer produced was thick, unfiltered, and often consumed through straws or reed tubes, as it wasn't the smooth, brand-new, crisp beverage we're used to today. Instead, it was more like a porridge, with a thick, hearty consistency. A curious detail worth noting is that the Mesopotamians often flavored their beer with dates and various herbs. This gave the drink a sweet, almost fruity taste. Unlike the bitter flavors we associate with beer today, dates, which were widely grown in the region, were mixed into the brewing process, infusing the liquid with their sweetness. This addition was likely a way to mask the more unpleasant flavors of fermentation, as well as a way to make the drink more palatable for the masses. You can imagine the rich, almost intoxicating scent of the beer as it fermented, filled with the sweetness of dates and the earthy scent of barley. One interesting historical tidbit is that ancient Mesopotamians were among the first to experiment with fermentation techniques, and their beers were often stronger than the ones we drink today. The high sugar content from the barley and dates, combined with the slow fermentation process, would result in a potent brew, one that could pack a punch. This was beer that could be consumed not only as a beverage, but also as a form of sustenance. In fact, the Mesopotamians often drank beer with meals, using it as a replacement for water or wine. It was a vital part of their daily diet, providing nourishment and hydration. Historians still argue about the exact strength of Mesopotamian beer, with some suggesting it was more akin to a thick, nutritious porridge, while others believe it was stronger and more intoxicating. One thing is certain: beer was integral to Mesopotamian society, and the brewing process was both an art and a science. It required skill, intuition, and a deep understanding of the fermentation process. The brewing process itself was a far cry from the modern, mechanized systems we use today. It was labor-intensive and required the cooperation of many people. This communal aspect of brewing was crucial, as beer was a social drink as much as it was a sacred one. The brewing process brought people together, whether in the temples or in private homes, to participate in the creation of something greater than just a beverage. Beer was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of life, a gift from the gods, and a means of connecting with both the divine and the community. As you stand beside the brewing vats, watching the workers carefully stir the thick mash, you realize that brewing was a deeply sacred act for the Mesopotamians. They weren't just making beer. They were making a connection with the gods, with the earth, and with each other. The beer they brewed was a product of the land, and it carried with it the essence of life, fertility, and divine blessing. It was a drink that connected them to the cosmos, to the earth, and to the eternal cycle of life. Historians still argue about the exact significance of the brewing process and the role beer played in Mesopotamian society. Some suggest that beer was simply a drink for the masses, while others believe it was a divine gift, a means of communication with the gods. Either way, it's clear that the Mesopotamians were pioneers in the art of brewing, and their techniques laid the foundation for the beer we drink today. As you step into the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, imagine the rituals that surrounded beer. In this civilization, beer was much more than a beverage. It was a symbol of life, prosperity, and divine favor. The temples were the central hubs of Mesopotamian life, and it was within these sacred walls that beer played a pivotal role in rituals and ceremonies. You can almost see the flickering torchlight reflecting off the polished stone floors as priests and worshippers gather around the altar, offering their prayers to the gods. Beer wasn't just consumed for refreshment or nourishment. It was an essential part of the religious rites that connected the people with the divine. It's easy to picture the sacred goblets of beer being lifted in reverence as prayers were said and offerings made. The beer itself was often offered to the gods, poured onto the earth, or placed before the statues of deities, symbolizing a bond between humanity and the divine realm. Imagine the aroma of the beer, rich, sweet, and earthy, filling the air as it was offered up to the gods in rituals meant to ensure a bountiful harvest and divine protection. One of the most fascinating rituals involving beer was the sacred marriage ceremony. This was a yearly event that celebrated the union of the goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, and the king, representing the fertility and prosperity of the land. The beer, which had been brewed in great quantities, was offered to both the participants and the gods during this sacred rite. The beer was symbolic of fertility, life, and divine blessings. The process of brewing the beer itself was seen as a sacred act, one that involved divine favor to ensure the prosperity of the people and their land. You can imagine the grandeur of the ceremony, with the king and the high priestess standing side by side, holding their ceremonial cups filled with beer as they reenacted the sacred marriage. The scene would have been filled with the sound of chants and the rhythmic beat of drums as the crowd watched in awe. Beer, in this case, wasn't just a drink. It was an offering that represented the harmony between the heavens and the earth. The people believed that by partaking in this sacred beverage, they could share in the divine favor and prosperity that flowed from the gods. Historians still argue whether beer was the primary focus of the sacred marriage ritual, or if it was simply one element in a larger ceremony. Some scholars suggest that beer symbolized fertility and the cyclical nature of life, while others believe it was more closely tied to the goddess's role in agricultural success. Either way, the connection between beer and ritual was clear. It was a symbol of divine favor, a link between the gods and humanity. In addition to its role in ceremonies, beer was also a common offering in personal prayers and petitions. If an individual sought a favor from the gods, they might bring a cup of beer to the temple as part of their prayer. This humble offering, given in reverence, was seen as a way of establishing a connection with the divine. Imagine the quiet reverence as someone knelt before the temple's altar, offering their beer to the gods in hopes of a good harvest, a successful trade, or a safe journey. Interestingly, beer was also associated with the goddess Ninkasi, the patroness of brewing. Ninkasi's name became synonymous with beer itself, and she was often depicted in art and texts as the divine brewer who provided the people with this sacred drink. One of the most famous artifacts associated with Ninkasi is a hymn, known as the Hymn to Ninkasi, which outlines the steps for brewing beer. This hymn not only shows the importance of beer in Mesopotamian culture, but also highlights the sacred nature of the brewing process. You can almost imagine the words of the hymn being recited by a group of priests, chanting the praises of Ninkasi as they prepared the beer for the next ritual or festival. The beer of ancient Mesopotamia was also tied to the cycles of nature. It was brewed in anticipation of the harvest. When the fields were ready to yield their bounty, beer was consumed during the harvest celebrations as a way to honor the gods for the abundance they had provided. These celebrations would have been filled with music, dances, and communal feasts, where beer flowed freely, and people came together to give thanks for the fertility of the land. The Mesopotamians believed that the gods controlled the land's fertility, and beer was one of the ways they communicated with the divine by offering beer to the gods. They sought to ensure that the earth remained fertile, the crops would grow, and the people would prosper. This connection between beer, fertility, and divine favor was deeply embedded in the culture of ancient Mesopotamia, where beer was not only a drink, but a ritualistic offering that kept the balance between humanity and the gods intact. One quirky fact worth noting is that the Mesopotamians weren't just brewing beer for ceremonial purposes. They also enjoyed beer as a daily drink, particularly during communal meals. Beer was often consumed alongside bread, another staple of the Mesopotamian diet, and was an essential part of daily life. In fact, some historians suggest that beer may have been more common than water in the Mesopotamian diet, as beer was considered safer to drink due to the fermentation process, which could kill harmful bacteria in the water. Historians still debate the extent to which beer was tied to specific religious rituals versus its role in everyday life. Some believe beer was primarily consumed during sacred events, while others argue that it was a common part of the diet, consumed by people of all social classes. Either way, it's clear that beer was deeply integrated into Mesopotamian culture, both as a symbol of divine favor and as a daily necessity. You can see the people of ancient Mesopotamia now, gathered in temples, holding their ceremonial cups filled with beer, raising them high to honor the gods and ask for their blessings. The sound of laughter, music, and chanting fills the air as beer flows freely. The connection between the divine and human realms celebrated with every sip. In this moment, beer isn't just a drink. It's a vital link to the cosmos, a sacred offering that sustains both the body and the soul. Now that you've seen the profound role beer played in Mesopotamian life, let's delve into the actual art of brewing. Imagine the bustling city of Ur or Babylon, with its massive ziggurats, and in the heart of the city, the complex brewing houses where beer was made. You'd hear the clinking of clay pots, the stirring of ingredients, and the soft murmurs of brewers at work, all in the shadow of ancient stone structures. To understand the significance of beer in Mesopotamian culture, it's crucial to first grasp how they made it. The process was surprisingly sophisticated for its time, involving a few key ingredients: barley, water, and yeast. But before the Mesopotamians could begin their brewing, they had to grow the barley, which was one of their primary crops. You can almost feel the sun on your back as you walk past the swaying barley fields, the golden grain ripe for harvest. The Mesopotamians were masters at cultivating barley, and they had perfected the growing process over generations. Once the barley was harvested, it was time to turn it into beer. The first step involved malting, which is the process of soaking barley in water and allowing it to sprout. This would activate the enzymes necessary to break down the starches into sugars. The barley was then dried in the sun, and the brewers would grind it into a coarse flour. It was then mixed with water to create a thick paste known as wort, which would serve as the base of the beer. You can almost see the dusty hands of the brewers working the grain, their fingers stained with the earthiness of the barley. The next stage of the process was fermentation. Unlike today's beer, which relies on modern, specific yeasts, the Mesopotamians relied on naturally occurring wild yeasts in the air. They didn't have the sophisticated tools we use today, like fermentation tanks or temperature controls, but they made do with large clay vessels. These vessels were often sealed with clay stoppers, which helped to contain the natural yeasts. You can almost smell the fermentation, a thick, yeasty scent that would fill the air as the mixture bubbled and brewed. One interesting thing about Mesopotamian beer was that it wasn't a clear drink like modern beer. Instead, it was thick, almost porridge-like, with a chunky consistency due to the grain being left in the mix. The beer would have been sipped through straws, often made from reeds, to avoid ingesting the solids that floated in the liquid. Imagine the sound of the straws tapping against the clay cups, the drinkers sharing in this communal ritual as they passed their cups to each other, laughter echoing around the room. Historians still argue whether the beer produced in ancient Mesopotamia was primarily consumed as a social beverage or if it had more medicinal purposes. Some believe that beer was seen as a nutritious drink, packed with calories and a source of hydration, while others suggest it was consumed mostly during religious rituals. Either way, it's clear that brewing beer was a highly regarded skill, with brewers often held in high esteem in their communities. The brewing process itself was so important that it was often overseen by the goddess Ninkasi, the patroness of beer and brewing. Imagine the goddess Ninkasi, depicted in grand murals and carvings, a symbol of fertility and abundance. She was often shown as a divine figure who ensured that the beer was brewed properly and that it would be ready for the next festival or religious ceremony. It wasn't just about the physical process of brewing. There was a spiritual component as well. You can picture the brewers invoking her name as they worked, offering their gratitude for the sacred beverage they were creating. As beer was consumed across Mesopotamian society, the brewing process was passed down through generations, with each family or guild of brewers adding their own little tweaks to the formula. This passing down of knowledge, like an oral tradition, ensured that brewing continued to improve, refining the craft over the centuries. As the ancient people of Mesopotamia perfected their brewing techniques, beer became more than just a drink. It was a way to connect with the gods, nourish the body, and bring the community together. In addition to brewing, the Mesopotamians also had a variety of beer-related rituals and customs that made beer a cornerstone of their culture. For instance, beer was often consumed during religious festivals, like the Zagmuk, a New Year's festival that honored the god Marduk. During these celebrations, beer was used in large quantities, offered in sacrifices, and consumed by the people in joyous revelry. You can picture the vibrant scene, people in flowing robes, garlands of flowers, and colorful garments, raising their cups to the gods as the celebration unfolded. Beer was also consumed during weddings and funerals, marking significant life events. Imagine the solemnity of a funeral procession, where family members would sip beer as part of their mourning rituals, invoking blessings for the deceased soul. The connection between beer and the cycle of life, death, and rebirth was deeply ingrained in Mesopotamian society, a reflection of the cyclical nature of the world around them. Historians still debate how much influence beer had on the ancient Mesopotamians' social structure. Was it merely a drink for the elite, consumed by kings and priests during their sacred rituals? Or was it a beverage for the common people as well? Something that could unite the masses and bring them together in celebration. Perhaps it was both. Either way, there's no denying that beer played a central role in Mesopotamian society, both as a source of sustenance and as a divine offering. Now, as you stand in the bustling streets of ancient Ur, you can see the brewing houses in the distance, the smell of fresh beer wafting through the air. You can almost taste the beer yourself, thick and earthy, a drink that connected the people to the gods, to the land, and to each other. This sacred beverage, brewed with care and reverence, was not just a drink, it was a symbol of life, unity, and divine favor. Imagine yourself standing in a grand hall in the heart of ancient Babylon, surrounded by towering stone walls, intricate carvings of gods and kings, and the hum of voices in celebration. The air is thick with the scent of incense, freshly baked bread, and, of course, beer. The Mesopotamians didn't just drink their beer casually. It was deeply embedded in the rituals that defined their religious and social life. Here, beer wasn't just a beverage. It was a symbol of the divine, a sacred offering to the gods, and an essential part of their most important ceremonies. Beer was integral to the religious life of the Mesopotamians, often consumed during rituals to honor their gods. One of the most significant rituals involved offering beer to the gods as part of a broader sacrificial ceremony. You can almost hear the chants of the priests, the rustling of their robes as they move about, preparing offerings of food, bread, and, of course, beer, which was often poured into golden vessels and set before statues of the gods. Beer, like bread, was seen as a divine gift that could nourish both the body and the spirit, and to offer it was to show gratitude and reverence for the gods. Historians still debate whether the beer offered to the gods was seen as a literal sustenance or more as a symbolic gesture, a way to nourish the gods with the same food and drink that nourished the people. Either way, the connection between beer and the divine was unmistakable. The Mesopotamians believed that by offering beer, they could secure the favor of their gods, ensuring a bountiful harvest or protection from misfortune. You can imagine the quiet reverence in the temple, the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows on the walls as the beer was poured out, symbolizing the connection between the mortal and the divine. The use of beer in these religious rituals was not just limited to offerings to the gods. Beer was also consumed by the people during feasts and celebrations, many of which were tied to religious festivals. These festivals, often held to mark the changing seasons or the lunar calendar, were occasions for feasting, dancing, and, of course, drinking beer. You can picture the large, communal gatherings, with people dressed in their finest garments, adorned with jewelry and flowers, their faces painted with the colorful dyes of the time. The sound of music fills the air as people raise their cups in toasts to the gods, to one another, and to the prosperity of their communities. One of the most famous of these festivals was the Zagmuk, a New Year's festival celebrated in honor of the god Marduk. It was a time of great revelry, where beer flowed freely and the entire community gathered to celebrate the renewal of life. Imagine the scene. Grand feasts in the shadow of towering ziggurats, the air thick with the scent of roasting meats, the sounds of music and laughter, and the rhythmic clinking of beer cups. People from all walks of life, priests, kings, farmers, and craftsmen, shared in the celebration, all united by the sacred beer that flowed freely from the vessels in their hands. But beer wasn't just for the good times. It was also a crucial part of more somber rituals. During funerals, for example, beer was consumed as part of the mourning process. You can picture a funeral procession moving slowly through the streets, mourners dressed in their somber mauves, heads bowed in respect for the deceased. As the body of the deceased was laid to rest, family and friends would drink beer in honor of the departed, hoping to ensure that their spirit would rest in peace and that the gods would watch over them in the afterlife. It's a powerful image, one that underscores the dual nature of beer in Mesopotamian culture. It was both a celebratory drink and a somber offering, connecting life and death in a seamless cycle. Interestingly, beer was also consumed by the workers who built the monumental ziggurats and temples of Mesopotamia. It was common for these laborers to be given beer as part of their daily rations, a reward for their hard work and a way to ensure that they remained hydrated and nourished. This practice wasn't just about keeping workers happy. It was also a way to ensure that the beer itself was imbibed in large quantities, reinforcing its role as a staple of Mesopotamian life. Imagine the sight of laborers toiling under the hot sun, their hands rough and calloused from the stonework, but with a cup of beer in hand, taking a moment to quench their thirst and restore their strength. Beer, it seemed, was truly the drink of life in ancient Mesopotamia, consumed by all, from kings to commoners, and used in every aspect of daily life and ritual. The beer rituals also extended to the realm of sexuality, with beer often playing a role in fertility rituals. Fertility was of great importance to the Mesopotamians, who saw it as essential for the continuation of their agricultural society. They believed that by honoring the gods through offerings of beer and performing fertility rites, they could ensure the fertility of the land, animals, and people. These rituals were sometimes accompanied by sacred marriage ceremonies, where the king or priest would symbolically marry the goddess of fertility in a sacred union, ensuring that the cycle of life and growth would continue. Historians still debate whether these fertility rituals were truly intended to stimulate sexual activity, or if they were more symbolic, representing the connection between the gods and the natural world. Some scholars suggest that beer was used in these rituals as a way to induce altered states of consciousness, making it easier for participants to connect with the divine. Others argue that beer was simply a tool for enhancing the celebratory atmosphere, helping people to relax and become more open to the spiritual messages of the ceremony. Regardless of the intention, it's clear that beer played a crucial role in these sacred rites, further cementing its importance in Mesopotamian society. Beer, with all its multifaceted uses, truly served as a bridge between the human and divine worlds. It was consumed in times of joy and sorrow, in times of peace and war, as a drink of communion, celebration, and connection to the gods. For the Mesopotamians, beer wasn't just a drink, it was a part of the fabric of life itself, woven into the very rituals that governed their existence. Now that you've had a taste of just how deeply beer was woven into the Mesopotamian culture, let's dive deeper into the brewing process itself. Picture yourself in an ancient brewery. The hum of voices echoing through the air as large clay vessels bubble with the fermenting brew. The smell of yeast, grains, and herbs fills the air, and the sound of water sloshing and grains grinding becomes a rhythmic backdrop to the work of the brewers. Beer was not just a casual drink. It was a craft that required expertise, knowledge, and an understanding of the natural world. The brewing process was a sophisticated one for its time. You could almost imagine the brewers in their aprons, working diligently at large stone mortars, grinding barley and other grains to make flour, which would then be mixed with water to create a thick paste. This paste, known as bapir, would be the foundation of the beer. The bapir was left to ferment, and this fermentation process was vital in transforming the ingredients into the alcohol-laden beverage the Mesopotamians cherished. In addition to barley, which was the primary grain used for brewing, the Mesopotamians also utilized other ingredients, such as emmer wheat and dates, to give the beer its distinctive flavors. These additions were carefully measured and mixed, ensuring that each batch of beer was consistent in taste and quality. You might even notice brewers experimenting with different spices and fruits to create unique flavors. Each region in Mesopotamia probably had its own slight variations on the recipe, depending on local resources and traditions. Once the bapir had been allowed to ferment, the liquid was then drained off, leaving behind the solid remains, which were often used as a form of bread or cake. The liquid itself was then strained and poured into large clay jars for further fermentation. This process could take days or even weeks, depending on the desired strength of the beer. It was a time-consuming practice, but the results were well worth the wait. Beer was considered one of the most prized beverages in Mesopotamia, a drink that not only quenched thirst, but also nourished the body and soul. Historians still debate the specifics of how the Mesopotamians controlled the fermentation process. Did they rely on natural yeasts in the air? Or did they have some early form of a yeast starter? Some scholars believe that the Mesopotamians had a more sophisticated understanding of fermentation than we might imagine, possibly using a special clay vessel to encourage the growth of certain beneficial microorganisms. Others think that the process was more spontaneous, with brewers simply waiting for the right conditions for fermentation to occur. Either way, the fact that Mesopotamians were able to produce such a large variety of beers suggests a level of mastery in brewing that was far ahead of their time. One fascinating aspect of ancient Mesopotamian brewing was the fact that beer was often made in large communal batches. This wasn't a process done in solitude. It was a community affair. Families, guilds, and even temple workers would gather to brew beer in large, shared brewing rooms. This communal brewing process wasn't just about creating a drink. It was also an important social activity. You could imagine the brewers laughing, singing, and sharing stories as they worked together, passing down knowledge from generation to generation. The beer brewed in these communal settings was then shared among the community, contributing to the social fabric of Mesopotamian life. It wasn't just the wealthy and the religious elites who had access to beer. It was a beverage enjoyed by all social classes. In fact, beer was often consumed by workers who labored on large-scale projects, such as the construction of ziggurats or the building of city walls. Workers would be given beer as part of their daily rations, both as a way to keep them hydrated and as a form of compensation for their hard work. It wasn't just a drink. It was also a tool for ensuring the productivity of laborers, keeping them satisfied and able to continue their work through the long hours of the day. Imagine the sight of workers toiling under the hot Mesopotamian sun, their hands rough and calloused from the labor, but with a mug of beer in hand, ready to quench their thirst and give them the strength to keep going. The social importance of beer also extended to the marketplace, where it was sold to individuals looking to enjoy it at home or during gatherings. You can picture the bustling markets of Babylon, with vendors calling out to passers-by, offering clay cups of beer for sale. People would gather in small groups to sip their beer, sharing stories, gossip, and laughter. Beer was, in many ways, the drink of the people, a beverage that brought them together and allowed them to relax and unwind after a long day's work. It's interesting to note that despite its importance, beer wasn't always readily available to everyone in Mesopotamian society. While beer was a common drink for the lower classes, the wealthier elite often preferred wine. Wine, made from grapes and imported from distant regions, was considered a luxury and a status symbol. Beer, on the other hand, was seen as the drink of the working class. Though, as we've seen, it was far more than just a simple beverage. Beer was a drink that carried with it a rich cultural and religious significance, one that was celebrated in rituals, feasts, and communal gatherings. Historians still debate whether beer was consumed more widely in ancient Mesopotamia than wine, or if it was simply more accessible to the general population. Some suggest that beer was the everyday drink for most people, while others believe that wine may have been enjoyed just as often, but by a different social class. Either way, it's clear that beer held a unique place in Mesopotamian society, one that combined practicality, social cohesion, and spiritual significance. As you imagine the brewers at work, carefully crafting each batch of beer, consider how the drink shaped the daily lives of the people who lived in ancient Mesopotamia. From the communal brewing sessions to the grand feasts and religious rituals, beer was the drink that tied together their social, cultural, and spiritual worlds. It was more than just a beverage. It was a symbol of life itself, a drink that nourished the body and the spirit, bringing people together in ways that no other drink could. As you stand in the midst of this ancient city, listening to the distant hum of life that surrounds you, it's impossible to ignore the deep connection between beer and the religious practices of the ancient Mesopotamians. You might already know that the Mesopotamians were a deeply spiritual people, with a pantheon of gods and goddesses overseeing nearly every aspect of their lives. These deities were not just abstract concepts. They were tangible presences that shaped the world around them. And in this world, beer wasn't just a drink. It was considered a divine gift, a sacred substance that held power, magic, and the ability to connect the earthly and the divine. Beer was not only consumed for its physical properties, it was believed to have spiritual significance. The Mesopotamians often incorporated beer into their religious ceremonies, where it was offered as a gift to the gods. One of the most important deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon when it came to brewing and beer was Ninkasi, the goddess of beer and brewing. She was widely revered, and her name became synonymous with the art of brewing. Imagine the priests and priestesses in their long, flowing robes, holding cups of beer in one hand, offering it to Ninkasi in a sacred ritual designed to honor her and ask for her blessings. The rituals involving beer were often performed in grand temples, and the ceremonies were elaborate and well attended. The beer offered in these ceremonies wasn't just any beer. It was the product of the finest brewers, made with the highest quality ingredients and prepared with the utmost care. As the ceremonial beer was poured into the sacred vessels, the people would gather around, hands raised in prayer, asking for favor from Ninkasi. It's not hard to imagine the sense of reverence and awe that filled the air as the offerings were made. Beer, in this context, was not only a means of connecting with the gods, but also a way to demonstrate respect and gratitude for the divine forces that controlled life and death. Historians still debate how central beer was to religious rituals in Mesopotamian society. Some suggest that the offerings of beer to the gods were a routine part of religious practice, while others argue that beer was reserved for special occasions and important festivals. Either way, it's clear that beer played a role in establishing a connection with the divine, and it was used in rituals to invoke the blessings of the gods. Beer wasn't just a drink for the masses. It was a symbol of piety, a sacred offering that transcended the ordinary and entered the realm of the divine. There's a fascinating myth related to beer and the Mesopotamian gods, one that reveals just how deeply beer was tied to their beliefs about life and death. This myth centers on the goddess Ninkasi herself. In ancient times, the gods and goddesses of Mesopotamia were believed to live in a celestial realm, but they could visit the mortal world at will. According to one version of the myth, Ninkasi descended from her heavenly abode to the earthly realm, where she shared the secrets of brewing with the people of Mesopotamia. In this myth, Ninkasi's gift of beer is seen as a blessing, a means of ensuring abundance, health, and prosperity for the people. This myth also ties beer to the theme of death and rebirth. The gods were not just concerned with the here and now, they also controlled the cycle of life and death. In Mesopotamian religious thought, beer played a key role in ensuring that the dead would have sustenance in the afterlife. During funerary rituals, offerings of beer were placed near the graves of the departed, and it was believed that the deceased would drink from these offerings in the afterlife. Beer was thus thought to nourish the dead as it nourished the living, ensuring that both the living and the dead could thrive in their respective worlds. It's a powerful thought. Beer as a symbol of continuity, a bridge between the realms of life and death, sustenance and transcendence. One of the most well-known Mesopotamian festivals that involved beer was the Akitu festival, a multi-day celebration held to mark the start of the new year. The Akitu festival was a massive event that saw the entire city of Babylon and other Mesopotamian cities come alive with feasting, music, and, of course, the consumption of vast amounts of beer. The festival was not just a time for revelry, but also for religious observance. Beer was poured out in offerings to the gods, and the people participated in elaborate rituals to ensure the favor of the divine forces. The Akitu festival was a time for renewal, for celebrating the eternal cycle of life and death, and beer was central to this celebration. You can almost hear the drums and flutes in the air as the people of ancient Mesopotamia gather to celebrate. The aroma of freshly brewed beer fills the streets, and large clay pots of beer are passed from hand to hand. The people, dressed in their finest linen robes, lift their cups and offer thanks to the gods for their blessings, hoping for another prosperous year. The festival is filled with laughter and joy, but also a sense of reverence for the divine forces that control their fate. The beer flows freely, a symbol of the abundance of the gods, and the people drink deeply, celebrating life and the continuity of their existence. Interestingly, the consumption of beer wasn't always a light-hearted affair. It was also used as a form of social control. The rulers and priests of Mesopotamia would sometimes distribute beer to the people as a form of reward or as part of state-sponsored feasts. This wasn't just a gift of hospitality, it was a way to maintain social order. The consumption of beer, while unifying and celebratory, also kept the people in line. It was a reminder that the rulers controlled not only the material wealth of the land, but also the very sustenance of the people, including their access to beer. Historians still debate whether beer was used more as a tool of control than a simple celebratory beverage. But it's clear that beer had a dual function in ancient Mesopotamian society. It was both a divine offering and a symbol of power. Beer also had a special place in the social life of Mesopotamian cities. While the elites may have enjoyed their wine, beer was the drink of the common people. Yet it wasn't just the lower classes who enjoyed beer. It was a beverage that transcended social classes, enjoyed by everyone from kings to laborers. It was shared in taverns, at festivals, and in homes. You might find the same beer being served at a feast in the palace as you would in the humblest home. Beer, in a way, was a social equalizer, a drink that could bring together people from all walks of life, uniting them in their shared humanity. As you wander further into this bustling Mesopotamian city, you begin to notice that beer was not only a tool for socialization and religion, but also a valuable commodity. Just as the precious metals and grains that flowed through the city were used to barter and trade, beer too had an economic importance. In fact, it was one of the earliest forms of currency in ancient Mesopotamia. This wasn't just a matter of beer being a nice drink to enjoy. It was a means of transaction, a unit of exchange that had real, tangible value. You might think of beer as something purely for enjoyment or ritual. But in Mesopotamia, it could be traded for goods, services, or labor. Beer was a stable and reliable part of the economy, a commodity that people could use in exchange for everything from food and clothing to livestock and land. The people of Mesopotamia weren't just brewing beer for fun. They were brewing it because it had genuine economic worth. The government even controlled beer production in many instances, collecting taxes in the form of beer and regulating its distribution to ensure the economic system ran smoothly. Historians have uncovered texts from this time period that refer to beer being given as wages to laborers. Imagine this: workers, building the magnificent ziggurats or tending to the temples, receiving their payment not in gold or silver, but in large quantities of beer. It may sound unusual to us today, but for the people of Mesopotamia, it was just another part of their everyday life. Beer was seen as a sustenance, a reward, and a part of the labor system, ensuring that the workers stayed productive and could enjoy a fair share of the riches they helped create. Beer was also used in large-scale trade. The Mesopotamians were excellent traders, reaching as far as the Indus Valley and the Nile, as they traded their fine pottery, textiles, and grains. They also traded beer, often in large quantities. Imagine the caravans of traders crossing vast desert expanses, their cargo containing jars of beer, which they would sell or trade in distant lands. The value of beer in these transactions wasn't just because it was a popular drink. It also carried with it the social and religious weight of the Mesopotamian culture. What's more fascinating is how beer became intertwined with the development of the earliest forms of writing. Some of the earliest cuneiform tablets that we have today are administrative records related to the production and distribution of beer. These tablets contain lists of quantities, prices, and even the names of brewers and tavern keepers. The very beginnings of written language were often tied to the business of beer, tracking the flow of this precious commodity, ensuring that everyone from the king down to the common laborer got their fair share. The brewing of beer itself was a skill passed down from generation to generation. It was considered an essential craft, not just for its economic value, but for its ability to nourish and sustain the people. Brewing was largely carried out by women, and these women held a significant place in society. The role of the brewer was often respected, and some women even became successful business owners, running their own taverns and breweries. These women were not only providing a vital service to their communities, but were also part of the larger system of beer as a form of currency and trade. You can almost imagine a woman standing proudly at the entrance of her tavern, offering a mug of freshly brewed beer to a customer, who may be paying with a freshly harvested crop or a piece of fine pottery. Historians still debate how deeply beer production and distribution were tied to the Mesopotamian economy. Some suggest that beer was so integral to their economic system that the state controlled almost every aspect of beer production. while others argue that beer was produced and traded primarily by private individuals and families. Either way, it's clear that beer was much more than just a drink. It was an essential component of Mesopotamian society, fueling not just the labor force, but also the economic engine that drove the civilization forward. And yet, beer's role wasn't purely functional. As a commodity, it served to reinforce the social hierarchy, just as there were distinctions between the different classes in terms of food. So too were there distinctions in the quality and quantity of beer consumed. The wealthy elite might have enjoyed finer, more refined beers, while the common people drank more basic versions. But no matter the quality, beer was ubiquitous. Even the kings and priests, in their majestic palaces and temples, could be found drinking beer, albeit in more ceremonial ways, possibly accompanied by music and feasts that celebrated their divine power. The trade of beer also led to the creation of large, city-wide breweries that were operated much like factories. These brewing houses were central hubs for beer production, employing a large workforce of laborers who would tend the brewing vats, mix the ingredients, and ensure that the beer was of the highest quality. The process itself was somewhat labor-intensive, but for the Mesopotamians, it was just another day's work. Imagine the sight of a bustling brewery, with workers moving in sync to prepare the sacred brew, while the head brewer oversees the process, ensuring everything is in order. Historians are divided on the extent of the commercial brewing industry in Mesopotamian society. Some argue that brewing was more of a domestic craft, done on a smaller scale, while others believe that beer was so important to society that large-scale breweries were essential to the economy. Regardless of the scale, it's clear that beer had an unparalleled importance to the Mesopotamians, not just in social and religious terms, but in practical, everyday life. As the night falls, and you close your eyes for a moment, imagining the sounds of bustling marketplaces, the clink of clay beer mugs, and the laughter of people enjoying a refreshing drink. It becomes clear that beer was more than just a beverage. It was a way of life, a social connector, a religious symbol, and a vital part of the economic framework that helped sustain one of the earliest and most influential civilizations in history. As you settle further into the warmth of the Mesopotamian landscape, you begin to notice that despite beer's importance to the civilization, its role began to slowly shift over time. Much like many ancient practices, beer's place in Mesopotamian society began to face challenges. The empire, once a flourishing society centered around beer and its myriad uses, faced internal struggles that would shift the role of beer in their daily lives. Though beer remained a vital part of their culture, the beer industry would undergo a transformation, shaped by political, economic, and religious factors. First, the rise of other beverages played a significant role in beer's shift in importance. As trade with neighboring civilizations expanded, new methods of production and new ingredients for brewing were introduced, creating competition for Mesopotamian beer. Wine, for instance, became a staple among the elite, and as its popularity grew, it began to challenge beer's dominance. Wine was considered a more refined beverage, one that represented sophistication and social standing. By comparison, beer began to be seen by some as a drink for the lower classes or laborers. The rise of wine didn't signal the end of beer's prominence, but it did signal a shift. Historians note that the wealthy and powerful in Mesopotamia may have turned to wine because it was seen as more of a symbol of divine favor, an association that beer couldn't quite match. Beer, after all, was linked to the daily, humble activities of the common people. Wine, by contrast, was associated with gods and rulers, its consumption ritualized in feasts and ceremonies. In a way, wine claimed the throne that beer had once occupied, particularly in the more upper echelon circles of society. Despite this, beer was not entirely overshadowed. The working class, the laborers, and the priests continued to rely on it. It was still a part of their daily sustenance, even if it wasn't the symbol of high status it once was. In temples, beer maintained its connection to religious rituals, especially those involving Ishtar, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. These rituals often involved offerings of beer and food, and it remained a symbol of devotion to the divine. For the common people, beer remained a social and functional drink, part of their everyday life and continuing to play a role in their social practices. You can almost see the gradual shift as you imagine a bustling temple courtyard, where priests still conduct ceremonies, but with wine now taking a more prominent place at the altar. The common people still drink beer, sharing hearty mugs amongst themselves after a day of labor. The rich, on the other hand, are served wine in tall, elegant goblets, symbols of their superior status. But beer's continued presence in the lives of the masses suggests that the drink, while it may have lost its supremacy, never lost its cultural significance. For the common man and woman, it remained an anchor to tradition, a reminder of their place in the larger story of Mesopotamia. In the context of the empire's collapse, beer's role became even more poignant. As Mesopotamia weakened and various empires began to rise and fall in its wake, beer's position as a daily essential remained constant. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, and even the Persians, who conquered Mesopotamia, all encountered the importance of beer in everyday life, even as new rulers and conquerors brought their own customs. Beer remained a symbol of the common people's continuity in a changing world. The legacy of beer continued through these successive empires, with each adopting and adapting beer as part of their own cultures. Historians still debate how much of beer's continued role in these later empires can be attributed to the cultural heritage of Mesopotamia, or how much it was influenced by the political realities of the time. Did beer continue as a tool for social cohesion, as a comfort for the masses during times of instability? Or was it simply too ingrained in the culture to be replaced? It is hard to say. What is clear is that beer did not die with the fall of Mesopotamian civilization, nor did it lose its cultural meaning. It simply transformed, finding new contexts and new meanings in a changing world. Beer's long-lasting impact on Mesopotamian society also left a cultural imprint on the civilizations that followed. Beer continued to be brewed and consumed throughout the ancient world, and its symbolic significance carried on for millennia. In fact, it was the Mesopotamians who introduced the art of brewing beer to other ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Greeks and Romans. These civilizations built on the knowledge and practices that the Mesopotamians had pioneered, further refining the brewing process and increasing beer's cultural significance. Imagine the passing of knowledge through generations, a recipe for brewing passed along, evolving through different hands in different lands, from the great cities of Mesopotamia to those of Egypt, Greece, and beyond. This shared legacy became the foundation for the brewing traditions that would one day spread across the globe, making beer a universal part of human culture. While beer may not have remained at the forefront of Mesopotamian culture after the rise of wine, its influence can still be felt today. The fundamentals of brewing, the importance of beer in daily life, and the ties between beer and religion all stem from those ancient roots. Beer, for the Mesopotamians, was never just a drink. It was a part of the very fabric of life. And as you lay back, letting your mind wander over these centuries-old connections, you can almost hear the soft hum of the ancient breweries, the bubbling of the vats, the laughter of the people, and the clink of clay mugs echoing through time. As we wrap up this journey through ancient Mesopotamia, imagine stepping forward in time. You're walking through a bustling modern city. Perhaps it's New York, London, or Tokyo. The world is drastically different, and yet there's a connection that stretches back thousands of years. The clinking of beer glasses in pubs, cafes, and restaurants around the world. Mesopotamia may have crumbled long ago, but its impact, particularly through the legacy of beer, remains. Now, in the 21st century, you can find beer nearly everywhere, from upscale craft breweries to your local convenience store. The knowledge passed down by the ancient Mesopotamians continues to shape our everyday lives, and beer remains a beverage that's tied to both culture and community. Beer's continued popularity is a testament to its deep cultural roots. While beer may have begun as a simple, everyday necessity in ancient Mesopotamia, it has evolved into a complex and culturally significant drink. Today, it's more than just a drink for sustenance. It's a symbol of celebration, relaxation, and connection. Whether you're at a concert, a festival, or a quiet night at home, beer is often present, a reflection of its enduring role in human society. As you think back on the Mesopotamians and their ancient brewing techniques, you might even imagine how they would feel to see their beloved drink spread so widely across the globe. They knew that beer was a drink that brought people together, whether in moments of hard work, religious observance, or joy. And that, it seems, has never changed. The way beer is consumed today may look different, but its fundamental role as a social drink has remained unchanged. The art of brewing, passed down from those early days, has evolved into a craft with refined techniques, flavors, and traditions. Some things have changed. The equipment is more sophisticated. The variety of beers is mind-boggling, and perhaps the social contexts have shifted. But the connection to beer's history, to those early brewers in Mesopotamia, is still there, present in each sip, each toast, and each gathering. Historians still debate exactly how the ancient Mesopotamians might view beer's evolution. Would they be proud of how their humble beginnings transformed into a global industry? Or would they find it strange that their sacred drink has become an economic powerhouse? Perhaps the most important takeaway is this. The Mesopotamians laid the foundation for something far beyond their time. They crafted a drink that would go on to be shared across the globe, bringing together communities in ways that transcended their ancient world. Their legacy lives on, not just in history books or archaeological sites, but in the very act of sharing a beer with friends and strangers alike. In the end, the true magic of beer lies in its ability to transcend time. Its ancient roots remain with us, reminding us that even in the most advanced and modern societies, we still share a drink with those who lived centuries before us. And perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts the Mesopotamians gave to the world. Beer as a symbol of both continuity and change, of tradition and innovation, and of a human connection that stretches back through the ages. As the final moments of our journey come to an end, you can hear the soft hum of the ancient breweries once more, the sound of bubbling vats, the chatter of people gathering together, and the warm flicker of candlelight on the faces of those who shared in the rituals of Mesopotamian beer. You can almost feel the chill of the Mesopotamian evening, the warm firelight illuminating their mugs, and the knowledge that what they had created would ripple through history for thousands of years to come. Their legacy lives on in every glass of beer you drink, connecting you to a distant past that has shaped who we are today. And as you drift into sleep, imagine one final scene. Perhaps in your mind's eye you're sitting at an ancient Mesopotamian table, a clay mug in your hand, surrounded by the sounds of laughter and storytelling. You're sharing a moment of quiet companionship, just as the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians once did, with the same simple, powerful drink that has been part of human culture for millennia. The warmth of the drink fills you, and you know that, just like them. You're part of something far larger than yourself, bound together through time by this humble, magical beverage.